Okay, so the budget constraint looking like this is measuring how much of everything you can buy, and then that's kind of where we stopped, right? We last thing I think we said was if it's a point inside of your budget constraint, it's something you can afford to consume, but you're not spending all of your money, right? So right here, you're buying, looks like 3 pizzas, and then you can you're buying like 15 gallons of gas. You can totally do that, but then you're going to have money left over. Okay, and then any point on your budget constraint like this, that is when you spend all of your money, and it tells you a combination of goods where you spend all of your money. And then any point out here, that's something you cannot afford. Okay, and it's beyond your budget. Okay, now the next thing we want to talk about is something called indifference curves. Does anybody remember what indifference curves are? What do they tell you? Connor, were you trying to say something?
I can't remember the exact phrasing, but aren't indifference curves the basic, in layman's terms, the utility for purchasing said items? So like there's different levels of it. You have like 1 and 2, but the optimum is when it's tangent to the PPE.
Okay, very good. Yeah, the indifference curves are graphical representations of your different levels of utility from consumption, right? Because when you consume different things, you get different levels of happiness out of them. And indifference curves just graphically show you those different levels of utility, happiness. Okay, so let's look at that. For a typical indifference curve, again, you have your goods that you are consuming, right? So in this case, we'll just stick with pizza and gas. And then indifference curves typically look something like this, okay? So you can have I1, I2, I3, and these are 3 different levels of utility or happiness, okay? And now they're shaped a little bit weirdly, right? They're all convex, which means they all point toward the origin, right? That was so that's called a convex curve, and that is actually telling you something that you should all know. Okay, so let's look at how that works. Now, the slope of your indifference curves, okay, is called the marginal rate of transformation. Okay, and marginal rate of substitution. Okay, not transformation, substitution. Okay, and that essentially tells you how much you're willing to give up something for something else in terms of your preferences. Okay, so between these 3 different indifference curves, which one gives you the highest level of utility? Let's start there. I1, I2, I3. Okay, Tim said 3. Okay, so the more to the right you go, the higher your utility is, because you can see I3 is when you consume more pizza and more gas compared to I2 and then compared to I1, right? But let's stick with I1 for now. You can see that any point on this curve, okay, represent different combinations of these 2 things you can consume, right? So, maybe at this point you can get 10 pizza and 1 gallon of gas. Again, the numbers don't matter. I'm just trying to make up some numbers. And over here, you can get 2 pizzas and 5 gallons of gas, right? So if you call this point A, this is point B, this is telling you, hey, when you consume 10 pizzas and 1 gallon of gas a week, it makes you just as happy as 2 pizzas and 5 gallons of gas, okay? Because they're on the same indifference curve. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, that's what indifference curves measure. The slope of it is the marginal rate of substitution, which I told you is how much you prefer to exchange one good for another, okay? So you can see, well, this is a curve, so the slope constantly changes. And at point A, okay, let me change to a different color. At point A, the slope is kind of steep, right? It's almost vertical. But at point B, it becomes a lot flatter like this. Now, you know, since this class we don't do calculus, we do rise over run for your slope. At point A, okay, the rise is huge, the run is little, okay? But at point B, the rise is fairly small, run is huge, okay? So what this tells you is that at point A, you are willing to give up a lot of pizza this direction for a little bit more gas. Okay, so a little bit more gas is totally worth it for you to give up a lot of pizza. Why is that? Why do you think you're willing to give up so much pizza for a little bit of gas at point A?
It's because your marginal utility for pizza is just so low, where your marginal utility for gas would be higher.
Very
Like the
good.
trade-off.
Yeah, so last time, thank you, Joseph. Last time we said the more you consume something, the less you enjoy it, right? So here you got a bunch of pizza and you don't care about pizza that much anymore. Pizza is nothing special, right? And so on the other hand, you have very little gas. So you're like, hey, you know, I can get rid of a bunch of this pizza junk for a little bit more gas because I don't have it. Whatever you don't have is this novelty that makes you happy, right? We're kind of, you know, nobody's happy with what we have in terms of looks, I guess, because I always think, you know, in China, where I'm from, everybody, especially the girls, just want to be whiter, right? All the cosmetic products are whitening lotion, whitening cream, everything's getting whiter. Here's like people pay money to go sit, you know, in this big tank and get tan. And so I tell my kids all the time, because they're half Chinese, half, you know, white, and it's like, you guys got the best of both worlds, because everybody will think, and Chinese people think, wow, you're so much whiter, and Americans look like you're so tan, so you're welcome. So, but anyway, kind of human nature, right? Whatever we have, the more we have it, the less utility, marginal utility we get out of it. And then at point B, you can see you got quite a few gallons of gas. So all of a sudden, okay, if you lose a little pizza, you better get a whole lot of gas for it to make you just as happy, right? So your preferences change. And that is why these curves are bowed inward, okay, or convex. All right, I can see this is tough for a couple of you to stay awake, so yeah, I'll be brief. Hang in there, Luke. Yeah, but you know, you guys, by the way, this is totally off topic. Sleep now, because when you get older, even if you want to sleep, you can't. My dad used to tell me that. I didn't believe him, because I was like, that's just you. And now I'm in my 40s. It's starting to happen to me, and I hate it, because I want to sleep, but I just can't sleep that long at night anymore. I got 4.5 hours last night. So yeah, hang in there. But at night, don't stay up, actually sleep, because you'll miss it. Whoops, sorry. Junk call. I hope you guys can't really hear it. All right, okay. Any questions about indifference curves before we put the two together, the budget constraint and indifference curves? Okay, all right, so now the two, okay, the budget constraint and your indifference curves tell you kind of what we discussed last time, right? To achieve your maximum utility from your consumption, to make you the happiest when you buy a bunch of different things, you need to consider marginal utility of your consumption, whatever you're buying, how happy does it make you, versus the price, right? So here, the price factor is represented by your budget constraint, and then the marginal utility factor is represented by the indifference curve. So together, they actually determine what you will actually consume, right? Because, sorry, just really quick, because you can see both represent a bunch of different possibilities of your consumption. But which one will you actually do? Well, let's put them together and see, right? So let's say I have, okay, a case where, okay, this is your budget constraint, okay? And then I have three indifference curves, I1, I2, and I3, okay? Now, my question is, where will you actually consume? You can see that clearly you cannot consume anything on I3, because I3 is totally above your budget constraint, right? We talked about anything above your budget constraint, you just can't afford it. So you can't afford I3 for sure. But when it comes to I1 and I2, there are several points that's actually interacting with your budget constraint, right? You have right here, call this point A, that I1 crosses with your budget constraint. You have right here where I2 touches your budget constraint. Then you have right here, call it point C, where I1 crosses your budget constraint again. So if I tell you that your choices are somewhere among A, B, and C, which point do you think you're actually going to consume at?
Wouldn't it be B?
Okay, why?
I just feel like it's a good in between and it's within your budget.
Okay, all right. So it is definitely within your budget, right? Because B is a point on your budget constraint, which means you're spending all of your money, so you can afford it, okay? But is there something special about it being in between A and C? Is that why? You're right, B is the point, but is the location being in between, like being kind of in the middle, the right answer?
It's
Yeah,
more that it's further to the right, isn't it? So there's more, it gets more utility
okay, very
because
good.
it's a different indifference curve.
Okay, good. Were you gonna say something?
Oh yeah, I was going to say because the indifference curve 2 will have more utility than the indifference curve 1.
Okay, very good. Right. So I2 we said is a higher level of utility than I1. Any point on I2 makes you happier, right, than I1. So A and C are on I1, which give you a lower level of utility. You're not as happy at A or C compared to B. Okay. So, and in fact, B, since it's the tangent point, is the only point I2 is touching your budget constraint. So this is as high of a utility as you can get given your budget, right? Because any other point on your budget constraint, if you are right here, it's going to be, call this point D. D is going to be higher than I1, but lower than I2. So B is still better, right? Any point here, call this E. E is still not as good as I2. You can think maybe there's less to a dotted line of, I 1.2 or something, right? Because there's an infinite level of utilities. You can have a lot of different indifference curves even in between. So B is as happy as you can get given your budget constraints. So even though you can afford A, B, C, D, and E, B will be how much you actually consume once you figure out what makes you the happiest. And then for most people, when you consume, right? Okay, that makes sense? All right, okay, so now one thing I forgot to mention about your budget constraint is what happens when you have an income or price change, right? What if, let's say, your income increases to $200 a week right here? What's going to happen to your budget constraint?
It's going to double.
Okay, it's going to double in both products how much you can buy, right? You can buy more pizza and more gas, so it's going to shift and parallel out where it'll be, it'll hit 100 on this axis, and then somewhere up here it'll hit 20, right? So that's what's going to happen to your budget constraints. So when you have a higher income, then down here, for example, your budget constraint can shift out and somehow, whoops, that's not. So it can shift out and somehow, let's say, become tangent, pretend this is tangent to I3. So you would definitely then go to this point, right? Because that makes you happier now, okay? Now, what about if there's no income change, but there's a price change? What if, you discovered Little Caesars and you figured out that pizza actually doesn't have to cost $10. You can get $5 hot and ready, okay? What's going to happen then?
Then the y-intercept for pizza, instead of being at 10, it'll go up.
Okay, very good. Okay, so that's not pizza. Okay, well, it might be cardboard baked with some fake cheese on it, but for poor college students, I'm sure. I know I've survived on worse, and I'm sure a lot of you are surviving on worse. Okay, so at $5 a pizza, while gas price doesn't change, this end doesn't change on your budget constraint, but your budget constraint is going to go to 20 like this. You can afford now more pizzas, right? So, okay, I kind of derailed the whole discussion with mentioning Little Caesars. Okay, well, good thing I'm not buying that anymore to feed my kids or anything. So, but anyway, so when one price changes out of the two goods we're looking at, then it's going to rotate just to on the end of the price change. Okay, all right, that makes sense. Any questions about this? Okay, so this is on a personal level, but now tying it to our trade example, right? So on a national level, you do have indifference curves for a nation, right? So overall, our consumption can give us different utilities as a nation, right? So last time, I can't remember what we were trading. Oh yeah, just large and small airplanes, right? So large and small airplanes. So on a national level, okay, first of all, when you have a PPF, where you actually produce if you don't trade is determined by where the indifference curve lies tangent to your PPF, okay? So if this is the indifference curve that lies tangent to our PPF, and this is maybe 15 large and 20 small, then that would be how many the US will produce if we don't trade, okay? But if you recall last time we said, well, we showed that once we started trading, okay, our consumption possibilities became higher than our PPF. So what that allows us to do then is that we will then move on to, oops, that didn't work out very well. Okay, we will then move on to a higher level of, okay, I keep drawing it like that, so I'll just fix it like that. Okay, pretend it's tangent right there. Then we'll move on to a different level of utility, and then that allows us to consume more than what we can. So maybe 25 small airplanes and 20 large, right? So even though any point on this red line can be how much we actually trade with Brazil, we will decide how much we actually trade by seeing where our national indifference curve lies tangent to that new consumption possibilities frontier. Does that make sense? Okay, so all these points are possible, but this is what we will actually choose to do. Okay, all right, questions?
Sorry, Brother Ma, I'm just
Yeah.
confused about why that specific point is better than the other ones, even though it's on the same line.
Okay, very good, because this point, let's name them. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What's right here? 5. And 6, right? We drew 6 points, okay? So all these points are different choices of how much we can trade with Brazil. But if you can imagine all different indifference curves for us, then you can see 1 is going to be lying on an indifference curve like this. 2 is going to lie right here. 3 is going to be like here. And then 5, 5 is lower, so 5 is going to be somewhere like this, right? And or if we actually, even if we lie tangent here, it's going to be a lower level of utility, right? So 4 is going to be given, because all these indifference curves are going to be parallel to each other. Indifference curves will never cross, because if they cross, then that wouldn't make any sense from human behavior. That means sometimes you prefer one good more, sometimes you prefer it less, even though the quantities are very similar, and that doesn't make sense to any rational person, right? So since indifference curves cannot cross, then the point that lies tangent to a indifference curve on that consumption frontier is going to be the highest level of utility we can achieve as a nation. So that's going to be the level of trade that makes us the happiest. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Good. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Will the indifference curve be used to make decisions in a practical sense? Like if you're actually making decisions on what to produce?
Yeah. So of course, in reality, you're not gonna producer is not going to be able to, spend $50,000 and just buy this indifference curve map for the whole industry or the whole nation from, Amazon and then draw a line, decide where they're going to produce. But with trying different quantities and seeing how much people actually buy your products, then you can figure out what the optimal production is if you don't trade. And then if you do trade, then again, people's, the demand side will kick in and figure out really quick. The market will guide us really quickly to equilibrium of how much we want to import something, how much we want to export to another country and keep the rest for ourselves, right? So even though these are very abstract concepts, I get it, okay? But this is kind of how you can kind of, create a language to interpret what's actually going on in the world, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
And so does that mean that the indifference curve and the demand curve would be different? They don't exactly coincide?
Well, they just show different things, right? Indifference curves tell you your preferences, different levels of utility you get from consumption. The demand curve tells you the exact quantities you will buy given different prices, right? So any point on the demand curve comes from a tangent point on this graph. But the only thing is, once the price changes, your budget constraint is going to, rotate at different angles, right? So every time you rotate to a different angle, you go to a different optimal consumption point. And that's how we figured out how much people want to actually buy given different prices. That's exactly using this kind of a graph, actually specific. This is the national level. So, this graph right here is how we figure out the demand curve. We can say, okay, if this is, point B was your optimal point, and let's give it a quantity where this is, 5 pizzas and 30 gallons of gas, but that's when gas is assumed to be $2. Okay. Now let's say that gas becomes $1 per $1 per gallon. Then what's going to happen is then you are going to have a new budget constraint that looks something like this, right? And your new optimal consumption, okay, I'll just keep using red, I guess, will become something like this right here, right? You're with me? And this tells you on this new price for gas, you can afford 6 pizzas because you have more money for pizzas because gas is cheaper. But also the optimal amount of gas you buy is now 50 gallons. And so that is when you assume price is 1. And then on a demand curve, what you do is you look at gas, this is price, this is quantity, and you say, oh, I know at $1, okay, I want 50 gallons of gas. So this is the point on my demand curve. And at $2, I know I want 30 gallons of gas. So this is a point on my demand curve. Once you connect the dots, this is how you find your demand curve. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Okay, all right. Okay, so that's all I wanted to review. And I would like to give you your first quiz on iLearn at the end of class today. So if you have questions about any of this stuff, please ask now. Your chapter 2 quiz will not happen until next Thursday, but now that we've wrapped up all the review stuff, this is the last topic. I want to make sure you don't have questions, and then we'll do the quiz at the end of the class today. So we feeling okay? All right, so now what about chapter 2 stuff? I explained all the key points in the video, so I am wondering, did that make sense? Is it helping? What questions do you have? What do you want to talk about? Did the curved PPF scenario make sense? How to trade? Okay, so the difference is we talked about last time that curved PPF is more realistic because resources are specialized, or resources cannot be perfectly substitutable in different products. But in a curved case, as you specialize, then you're producing more of the good you have comparative advantage in. But once you do that, your opportunity cost starts going up. So you start losing your comparative advantage. So you stop right before you completely lose your comparative advantage, right? And so you partially specialize. You don't completely specialize. And so that's why, even though, like Dane was asking about the limitations of the Ricardo model, and there are many, it still explains why America still makes a lot of things that we don't have comparative advantage in, like, you know, textile products, right? And a lot of things that's high labor, but we still make it because if we completely get rid of them, then, and just push our production in other industries, then we can actually push too far and lose our comparative advantage. The cost can become too high. So we still make some of the stuff we're not good at because, you know, we can't completely specialize, okay? All right, and then another thing is, you know, how in a multiple country or multiple product scenario, then it's all about just relative opportunity cost. Then you can rank all the different countries' comparative advantage, who gets the most comparative advantage and second, et cetera, in this market. And then wherever, you know, the break on the world terms of trade is, and anybody that has lower cost than that will be exporting. Anybody that has higher cost than that will be importing, right? So, so even though you've only looked at cases with 2 products or 2 countries, the same principles apply. And you should be very grateful that we don't have more than 2, because then we start, you know, 3D graphs I can still handle, but it gets a lot more complicated. And if you have 4 products, heck, I don't know how to draw a 4-dimensional graph. So it becomes pure mathematical. You think this is all abstract theory, and wait till you go to grad school in economics, right? It's all about n dimensions and multivariable calculus and yeah, but anyway. All right, well, then can I ask you some questions, okay? What were you able to see in chapter 2 in your studies that you can relate to what you've observed in the real world? Either it actually explained it something, you go, oh, you went like, oh yeah, okay, I can see that. Or you went, wait, that's not right. That's not what I've observed. I want to hear what you've learned from your studies. I know it's, you know, abstract, but I hope you've spotted something in this process. If nobody talks, I'm just gonna randomly call on people.
This might be a little abstract, but I've seen how as the trade deals have changed under the
Prior administration now,
I think it
right?
was 2016
Uh-huh.
when they changed the trade deals a lot. You would see the stock market shoot up, and I know the stock market's not an exact reflection of the economy, but that it has some reflection on the economy. So you can see how, as the trade barriers were lowered, how there was more importing and exporting going on. So there were more, overall, there were more products being made as countries specialized at least a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. And yeah, related to that, you know, one, we'll talk plenty more about this in a later chapter, but what happens to jobs when countries open to trade? Because we say, you know, trade is beneficial to a country, and we've shown with some fairly primitive but useful models that we will end up consuming on a higher level than our PPF when we trade. So we are better off as a country, but what's happening to the jobs? Does trade bring just more jobs for everybody, Joseph?
They relocate the jobs. So something like, I think, well, I don't know, maybe I got a different understanding, but I thought Trump increased a lot of tariffs, so there's a big job increase in the US. And so people are kind of excited about, and this is neither here nor there, but maybe those tariffs being lowered, but then it's like, all right, how's that going to affect the jobs again? And so it's kind of like, it's not everyone benefits thing. It's, you know, the benefits a lot better, but then jobs have to be relocated into different areas or sectors.
Okay, very good. Yeah, so in fact, when you raise a tariff, then certain industries will have an increase in jobs, but other industries will not, right? Because as trade barriers increase, then whatever we import, those industries, those domestic industries will have an increase in jobs because they get protected. But the jobs that actually, export things usually will see a decrease. And like Max pointed out, in fact, who reported on this? I can't remember, but there was a report that came out just not too long ago that they said, Trump totally failed the trade war with China because we actually saw a decrease in manufacturing jobs at the end. It temporarily went up, but then economics doesn't lie, and we actually lost jobs, have a net loss in jobs at the end. And another thing, we'll talk plenty more about is when you charge tariffs. Trump claims that, right, we collected billions of dollars from China. It's like, did we? Right? Who paid those tariffs? Right? In a later chapter, we're gonna figure out, who actually paid the tariffs. So, but
I have a
anyway,
question.
yeah.
So the tariff, like when we import stuff, we put the tax on that things, right?
Right.
Then when we export, does it has a relationship with the import tax, like when we export the product?
Okay, good question. So rarely will countries charge a tax on exports because they all understand this is making, a profit for their own economy, bringing money in. But what happens with tariffs is often other countries will retaliate, like China did. We said, we'll tax your aluminum. They said, fine, we'll tax your soybeans, right? So that's how the trade war escalates and gets worse and worse as we go, right? And so nobody really wins in that situation. Now, well, I can't say nobody. Some people will win, but it's going to be at the loss of others, and the loss is usually way bigger than what those people win. Okay. All right. Okay. Any other questions or comments or things you observed?
So
yeah.
Sorry, I'm just gonna hop in real fast. Something that I don't want to say I was confused about it, but I want to understand better is towards the end of the chapter, it talked about multiple countries trading within each other, how one country gets land, then that country sends a different product, and then that country sends back to the first a different product. So how do those deals end up being made? How are they sustainable? All that kind of stuff.
Okay, yeah, very good question, Connor. So, different producers, different countries have different comparative advantages, right? Because we said last time, theoretically, you can have two countries that have identical opportunity costs, thus nobody will have any comparative advantage, and that can sustain trade. But in reality, no countries are identical in their opportunity costs and everything, right? So as long as you have even one difference, then trade can become possible and beneficial. Now, in reality, countries are widely different in their opportunity costs because of their, their resource difference, right? Whether you have lots of labor or lots of, ore or lots of oil or lots of high tech, and also because of their infrastructure set up or just the rules of game, how much taxes that you have to pay when you have a company in a certain country, and whether you have the network for transportation, et cetera. All these things will factor into the differences that allow countries to have a wide variety of different types of comparative advantage. So when many countries come together, really what they're trying to do is to find who can make what the cheapest, and then you can make that one thing, sell it to somebody else, and they'll make something different and sell it to you, and then a third country will be producing a third product. Then everybody will just trade in this kind of circular interconnected web way. And in terms of how they find out and how they make it sustainable, in a future chapter, we'll talk a lot more about it. Just global trade. The ideal way is to have no barriers for global trade worldwide, but for many other differences like cultural differences or history, like, or political differences, we don't get along with each other very well. So that's why regional trade agreements become extremely important, right? So we, Trump renegotiated the trade deal with Canada and Mexico. It used to be called NAFTA, North America Trade Agreement, and then he changed it to just USMCA, just US, Mexico, and Canada. So it was kind of boring name, but that's an example of like, well, you guys are my next door neighbors, and naturally we will do a lot of trade. So let's come up with a deal that we can lower the barriers and at least partially benefit from trade, right? So regional trade agreements actually are what sustain international trade. Then, and rarely we see any kind of global agreement. We just can't get along. Okay, all right, very good. Any other questions or comments of what you have observed? Can't talk today.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Justin, and then I didn't see who else. Oh, I just saw the three hands. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, Justin, go ahead, and then I'll go to the three hands that people have raised.
Okay. How could a developing country get into the global trading situation? For example, it's in the book that a lot of poor countries stay poor because they can't trade or they tend to be smaller.
Right.
How do they break that problem?
Okay, very good question. I don't have a, short answer solution for you, but many countries have been trying. One thing that we have seen that worked is dropping all trade barriers and just completely allow trade to happen no matter how other countries treat you. So the biggest success examples come from Eastern Asia. So when I was growing up, this is when this is happening. That was when this was happening, and there were 4 places in Asia were called the Asian Tigers. It was South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. These places were named the Asian Tigers because all 4 places started dirt poor after World War II. And they were just war ravished and, with hardly any resources to speak of, because these were all very tiny places, right? And this, especially Hong Kong and Singapore, just 2 cities. However, within just 4 decades or so, they rapidly advanced and achieved economic prosperity. And nowadays, the standard of living is pretty much in a developed country level, right? So, so the world was comparing these Asian countries and places to Africa, for example, or South America, and saying, what's going on here? And the only big difference we can spot is, well, a commonality they had was just pretty much all said, okay, we will just allow trade to happen, open up, whatever will happen. And they also have much simpler governmental structures, not complicated tax laws and et cetera. And that actually allowed people's economic ingenuity and activity to just flourish, and their economy can quickly take off. Hong Kong became a financial center, and Singapore became a financial center, but also a major port in Asia. And Taiwan and South Korea found their niche in the industries, mostly electronics, right? So nowadays, more than half of your electronic components probably came from Taiwan and South Korea. Okay, so if you allow trade to happen, then you can identify your comparative advantage and then develop it really, and that. But if you're talking about a country that's landlocked, just dirt poor, and have very, very little infrastructure, then it is very difficult to get started. And usually they are stuck with primary goods. That's goods that are not really manufactured or processed. And then it takes a more intentional, fostered environment for them to grow. And then the country itself needs to devote resources and willingness to fight for it too. And with African countries and South American countries, a lot of times it's their own rules of the game that prevent prosperity from happening, right? So corruption or the lack of infrastructure, or lack of allowing access to their markets and et cetera, right? So it's not a easy, I wish there was a rule saying, hey, everybody follow this and then you'll all be prosper. You'll all prosper. I wish it was that simple. But, okay, anyway. You're welcome. Okay, I'll go to you and then we'll go to Troy and then Kyle. Okay.
In the chapter 2, I saw the factor mobility, and I realized that I have seen an article saying after the war, Japanese, they stopped building the airplanes, but they used the technology to build the bullet train or train. So that's why I thought it's a good example of the.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very good. Yeah, because these factors can be moved around to different industries, and in fact, as bad as wars are, a lot of the modern technologies we all enjoy came from military developments originally. So, but yeah, thank you. That's a great example. Okay, Troy.
Something I observed about this with this pandemic, and I've been wondering about it. A disadvantage of the world trade was when the pandemic came about, some of those countries that produced masks and gloves and some of those other health things, they closed their doors and kind of hoarded them to themselves. But like even just if like a massive earthquake were something like that were to strike China and they weren't able to trade for 3 months, it would put a lot of things in major scarcity. Is there things that we can do while doing world trade to counter those from happening?
Yeah, great question. So when we get to trade barriers like tariffs, we will talk more about reasons for trade protection, where you don't allow trade to freely happen. And one of them is this idea that, well, we can't just rely on other countries to produce these things that they have competitive advantage on. What if there's a war or natural disaster and then they don't sell it to us anymore, right? And previously, before this pandemic happened, that was not really a concern because economists said, hey, look, they will want to make money, right? There's the financial incentive is there that it'll be difficult and if China stops making masks, Vietnam is going to pick it up, right? And if Vietnam doesn't do it, then India will jump in the game. And that has been true, but what you're talking about, I remember that clearly as well, just almost a year ago when the pandemic first spread to the rest of the world and became really bad. A lot of countries started hoarding supplies. And I remember, I got where's my mask? Yeah, there you go. I got a 3M N95 mask I bought before the pandemic. And well, it turns out 3M's biggest manufacturing plant is in China. And the US government told 3M, hey, you're an American company. We need N95 masks right now. How many can you provide? They said, okay, well, let us talk to our factory in China, see how much they can sell. Well, then the Chinese government came out and said, nope. Sure, you're a U.S. factory, but you're not allowed to ship any products to the U.S. We will buy any N95 mask you're producing and pay you market price, but you cannot sell it to your domestic market anymore. And then they couldn't because their factory was actually located in China, right? And they had to be ruled and controlled by the Chinese laws. So that did happen, but very quickly, right? The supplies, when the demand is there, the supply is going to fill it, because that's why within a couple months, even though N95 masks are still very hard to find, other masks are just flooding the market. And then N95s are hard to find, but then the Chinese producers started making their version of N95. They call it KN95. and that is readily available worldwide, right? So in a sense, what you are stating is absolutely true, but in the same time, we've seen it's not as big of a concern, because if the incentives are there to chase that profit, somebody's going to do it. Okay. And in fact, there are so many people in China that invested in mask production that made it big, and then some latecomers that jumped in right before the market price of masks went down back to nothing, and they pay the highest cost for their factories to set up, and then all of a sudden masks are not worth anything. So some people really lost everything. But nonetheless, though, even a global pandemic didn't prevent this production and the flow of goods for too long, right? So maybe just a month or two, but after that, it caught up. Okay, so Kyle?
Yeah, so my question's kind of going back to the trade wars, with like the argument that the Trump team was making. So like a large country like the United States has an absolute advantage. It's better for them to enter into instead of multilateral trade agreements, like just one-on-one trade agreements, so they can have more of that like bargaining power because of their size in the market. Is that at all true? With like, if we just do one-on-one trade agreements, we could get a better deal on the trade instead of entering like multilateral trade agreements with like the EU or something like that?
Okay, very good question. Generally speaking, right? And again, this is when we're assuming if you enter an agreement as free trade, no barriers, then the more trade partners you involve, the more you can gain from trade, because you can take advantage of different countries' lower opportunity costs or comparative advantage, right? When you are just a one-on-one trade agreement between two countries, then you have to buy whatever you don't have comparative advantage in from the other producer, but they don't necessarily have the lowest opportunity cost in the world, right? So the more partners you involve in a trade agreement, the more likely you will actually get more savings in the deal, right? Get more benefits from this trade deal. So yeah, and that's why we say if we could achieve free global trade, then that would be the biggest gain for everybody involved, right? But we don't get along, so that hasn't happened yet. Okay. All right, Connor.
Yeah, sorry for asking another question.
No,
but-
no, nobody said you can only ask one question in class. So yeah.
So we're dealing mostly with countries trading within each other, but I've very rarely ever heard of countries having their own, like, making products. They usually have corporations within their country do that. How do regulations, laws, and all this other stuff within corporations affect how countries are able to trade with each other?
Okay, very good question, right? So yeah, countries don't usually, so countries can come together and negotiate trade barriers, okay? And then that demand of negotiation for lowering trade barriers usually comes from the industries, right? So Ford can very well pressure our Congress and say, hey, China's our biggest market and your trade war is hurting us. You better go figure out a deal with them so we can sell our products easier. And so that's often how it originates. But so the government's job is to make sure they foster an environment where trade between private firms can happen more easily with less barrier, I guess. And when usually a head of a state goes to visit another country as an official visit, they will have a whole group of people that come with them. And oftentimes they'll have the CEOs or board of directors of chair of the board from major corporations with them. Like when Trump went to China in 2018 or 17, he had like over 100 American business representatives with them, men and women from the corporates in America, right? So, and they are the pushing force behind a lot of these governmental negotiations, but that is to foster the environment for their trade to actually happen in the market. Okay, okay, very good. All right, any other questions?
Yeah, I had and it wasn't really touched on in this chapter, but going along with the trades, because I remember substitution effect being talked about in the previous classes. Is that something where if the trade barriers get too high, then the country itself, or they'll reach out to a separate country to substitute whatever product they're trying to get?
Yeah, absolutely. So in fact, we don't even need to necessarily go out our way to do so, because when China started the trade war, actually, when Trump started the trade war with China, and China was restricted from trading as much to the U.S., Vietnam, very quickly jumped in and offered an olive branch to the U.S. and said, "Hey, how about we make some of these things China has been making," right? And then some of the local producers there even started talking with Apple and say, "Hey, you're not, your cost in China just went up because of the barriers. How about you set up a plant here? We have some similar equipment and infrastructure in place. We can make, screens for iPhones." And so in a sense, yes, very quickly, the next lowest cost producer will jump in. That's why, the whole, if we put a big tariff on China, the jobs will come back to America statement is not accurate and is not true, because it's, America is not the next in line for these manufacturing jobs, right? It's going to be Vietnam and India or Africa or South America. Many countries are there with much cheaper labor and other kind of costs that can do these low tech and low skilled manufacturing jobs. And so when you shut China down, very unlikely the jobs will come straight back to America. It'll likely just go to India, for example. So anyway, okay, thank you. All right, so I think I'd like to give you the rest of the time for your quiz now. So, oh, that reminds me, I forgot to post that group assignment ahead of time. I apologize. So I'll just put you into groups of 3 or 4 when you do the group part, but I have made your individual quiz 1 available, and it is available for half an hour, but it really should take you 10, 12 minutes. So go ahead and take that one first. I'll moderate it and see how long it takes you guys to finish. And if it takes longer, and maybe I'll give you some extra time to work on your group 1 outside of class, okay?
Where is this?
It is in modules, and in your review, the module for macro and micro review, you have, wait, let's see. Oh, no, sorry. It's in chapter 1. You can see individual quiz 1, and go ahead and click on it. It should be open now. And I'll be here to monitor what's going on in the quiz, but go ahead and take that, and I'll see how long it takes you to finish, and then decide what we're going to do with the group 1. Okay.
Sorry, that was called individual quiz 1 in
Right.
chapter 1.
Yes, individual quiz 1 is the one, and it should be the only one that's open anyway. The other quizzes, if you click on them, they'll tell you can't take them. I still see quite a few of you haven't started it yet. So it's in modules, chapter 1, individual quiz 1, okay? Oh, guys, yeah, so somebody told me there's duplicate answer on question 6 in individual quiz 1. That must be a typo. Let me get in and take a look. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I wonder how that happened. Okay. Okay, I just updated the question. I don't know if you guys can see it, but I changed one of the answers from 1 to half. So, but if you can't see it, don't worry about it, and I will just make sure nobody gets docked for answering one of the, if you chose the right answer but not the what the key said was the right option, then I will not count that. So yeah. Okay, yeah, if there's no change about on your quiz, then don't worry about it. Okay, let's see. How did these quiz get messed up? Okay, because I didn't go in and edit anything. Okay, so someone just told me there's no picture for quiz number 10. So let me find the picture and I'll share my screen with you. And so you can see it and do this. I apologize for that. It worked just fine last time, so I didn't expect any problems. Okay, so I found the picture. Let me blow it up and then share the screen with you. So this is for question number 10, okay? Can you all see it? Okay, yeah. I'm just going to drag this over. And